There are wounds that make no sound. There are questions you've asked yourself over and over again for years, yet no one has ever truly answered. Why could they hurt me without a hint of remorse? Why was my sincerity so easily dismissed? And how much longer must I wait for an apology that will never come? If you've ever found yourself trapped in a relationship with someone you deeply loved, yet constantly felt invisible, manipulated, or made to question your own reality, then this video is for you. Abundance of Untitled Men podcast. In today's video, we're going to peel back the mask and reveal what truly goes on behind the narcissist's cold exterior after they've hurt you. Not to excuse them, but to awaken you, to free you, and to help you reclaim ownership of your emotional life. Hit subscribe if you believe truth has the power to heal. And don't look away, because by the end of this video, you'll understand. Real freedom doesn't come from being validated by others. It comes from daring to believe in your own true worth. 1. When you stop pretending you're okay, have you ever asked yourself, how could they hurt me and feel no remorse? We live with a fundamental assumption about human emotions that everyone has a conscience, that if someone does something wrong, especially to a person who genuinely loves them, they will eventually feel regret. They'll recognize their mistake, try to make amends, and seek reconnection. But some people don't respond that way, not because they don't understand what's right, but because they don't have the same emotional architecture as you do. They are people you thought were just like you, yet something vital is missing inside them, the capacity for deep empathy. When you're hurting, when you break down in tears, when you pour your heart out in raw vulnerability, you are engaging with someone who simply isn't wired to process that in a meaningful way. This is not an excuse for them. It is a truth that must be clearly understood, so you stop searching for a human response behind a door that's been locked from the inside. For a narcissist, their entire psychological defense system is built to protect a fragile ego. They are not overflowing with self-love as they might appear. They are overflowing with fear of being exposed. And the heartbreaking reality is your pain doesn't awaken compassion in them. It triggers a threat response. They don't feel guilty. They feel endangered. Because if they admit that you are hurting because of them, they must also admit they're not perfect, that they were wrong. And in their inner world, that is absolutely intolerable. So instead of apologizing, they justify. Instead of listening, they rewrite the story. They'll call you too sensitive, too demanding, too unreasonable. And the scariest part, they do it so quickly, so instinctively, that you start wondering if maybe you really are the problem. That's the trap, a trap millions have fallen into, because you do have emotions, a conscience, and the capacity for self-reflection. You think that if you just explain sincerely enough, open up deeply enough, they'll finally understand. But the truth is, you're speaking a language they've spent their entire lives avoiding, the language of accountability, the language of truth. And if you keep trying to make them understand to reach their heart, the only thing you reach is hopelessness. Because in their internal world, you're not a wounded person. They see you as a threat to the survival of the ego they're desperately protecting. So the urgent task isn't to awaken emotions in them, it's to protect the emotions within you, to protect your ability to love, to empathize, to discern right from wrong, from being distorted by someone who does not reflect the truth. They are not a mirror, they are a maze. And if you keep searching for yourself in their reactions, you'll stay lost forever. Freedom begins when you stop hoping for validation from someone who simply isn't capable of giving it. And when you realize that their refusal to apologize says nothing about your worth, but speaks volumes about the limits of their emotional framework. You don't need to suffer more to prove your loyalty. You don't need to hurt deeper to be acknowledged. You don't need to scream in desperation, hoping someone might finally listen. You only need to start believing in yourself. Believe in the truth you feel. Believe that your pain is real, even when they deny it. Believe that you have the right to stop, the right not to forgive, the right to walk away. And when you do that, not from hatred, but from awareness, you step out of the role they wrote for you. The role of someone forever waiting to be loved the right way. The role of someone endlessly trying to prove they are enough. You don't need to prove anything. You only need to live in alignment with your own worth and refuse to let anyone, no matter how close they once were, redefine that for you. If this video speaks to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because healing doesn't begin with an apology. It begins the moment you decide your pain is real and you deserve to move forward free and whole. true why your silence terrifies them is a heartbreaking paradox in relationships with narcissists. Your pain doesn't awaken their conscience, it triggers their defense mechanisms. What you long for, remorse, understanding, or at least a moment of pause to truly listen, almost never comes. And it's not because you haven't expressed yourself clearly enough, or hurt deeply enough, or opened your heart sincerely enough. It's because you speak in an emotional language they've spent a lifetime learning to avoid. When you cry, when your voice cracks from holding in too much for too long, when you finally say what's been buried in your heart, you are not weak. You are deeply human. But sadly, you are standing before someone who severed their connection to that part of themselves long ago. Narcissists cannot process guilt the way a healthy soul can. To them, feeling guilty, admitting they might be wrong, is a direct assault on the ego they've spent their entire lives constructing. And if that ego collapses, they collapse. So when you say you hurt me, their mind doesn't respond with, I need to make this right. It responds with, I'm under attack. I must defend myself. That's when the twisted self-protection mechanism kicks in. They don't feel heartbreak for making you cry. They feel threatened by your attempt to make them face what they've spent their lives denying, the truth. And rather than opening up, they strike back with familiar weapons. Blame, minimization, gaslighting. They'll say you're too sensitive, too negative, or lacking empathy. They're not doing this with villainous intent like a character in a movie. Much of it is automatic. They're not sitting down and plotting how to blame you. They simply can't allow the idealized version of themselves in their minds to be shattered. And this leads us to a brutal truth. Your pain doesn't awaken their compassion. It awakens their fear of exposure. And if you don't understand this, you'll remain trapped in the cycle of, if I explain it better, maybe they'll finally get it. But the more you speak, the more they see you as the problem. The more you hurt, the more they perceive you as unstable. And if you're not careful, you'll start to believe it yourself. But you are not the problem. Your feelings are not wrong. Your pain is real. The only thing that's wrong is that you're seeking healing from someone who isn't capable of giving it. And when you begin to understand that truth, a deep transformation begins. You stop waiting for an apology. You stop expecting change. You release the impossible mission of trying to make them understand. Instead, you return to yourself and begin to heal from the safest place possible within. They can't rewrite your story if you stop handing them the pen. They can't define who you are if you stop letting them speak for your emotions. And they can't keep making you doubt yourself if you start trusting in your own true worth. You don't need to react to prove anything. They want you to react so they have a reason to keep hurting you. Your suffering doesn't trigger their remorse. It only confirms that they still have control. So the most powerful thing you can do is not to scream, not to beg, not to break down, but to withdraw calmly. It's a quiet rebellion, yet it carries immense weight, a soft overthrow they never saw coming. Because they're used to your pain, they're used to your explanation. What they're not used to is your silence wrapped in peace. It doesn't mean you've become numb. It means you've begun to see the difference between empathy and self-sacrifice. You've started to understand that not everyone deserves to witness the most vulnerable parts of you. Not everyone is kind enough to be worthy of the pain you've shared. And not everyone has earned the right to step into your soul, especially those who only enter to destroy. You are still someone who loves, who cares, who forgives. But now your love is more discerning, your forgiveness has boundaries, and your care is intentional. Not because you've grown cold, but because you've finally learned to love yourself first. If you're feeling awakened by these words, hit that subscribe button to keep walking this path of awareness, healing, and rebuilding your life. Let each video be a step forward, not to understand them better, but to understand yourself more deeply. 3. The psychological trap that keeps you from leaving. One of the greatest tragedies for victims living with a narcissist isn't just the pain they endure, it's the endless waiting for something that will never come. An apology, an acknowledgement, a moment of genuine understanding, a heart filled with real remorse. And so they wait another day, then another year, and sometimes an entire lifetime. The heartbreaking truth is, for a narcissist, admitting fault feels like a direct threat to their ego. They don't avoid apologizing because they don't know they're wrong. They avoid it because in their inner world, that kind of admission equals collapse. And to avoid that collapse, they will do everything, deny, blame, distort reality, even reverse roles to make you, the victim, look like the aggressor. When you try to explain, to reason, or simply seek emotional justice, you are not wrong. You're just trying to bring clarity into a relationship built on distortion. But you need to understand this. To the narcissist, clarity is the enemy. Clarity demands accountability. Clarity leaves no place to hide. So they blur every boundary until you get lost in the fog. You begin to feel like you're walking in circles. Every conversation goes nowhere. You ask a question, they respond with an accusation. You express a feeling, they use that very feeling to prove you're too sensitive. And slowly, you no longer know what's right or wrong. You just feel drained. That's not by accident. That's a tactic designed to make you doubt yourself. And when you start thinking, maybe I'm just too sensitive, maybe I overreacted, that's when their control begins to work. The truth is, you're not being controlled by chains or threats. You're being controlled through self-doubt. A person who no longer trusts their own emotions is easy to manipulate. A person who questions their memory or perception is easy to break. But now, you have to stop. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, why do I keep explaining what's already crystal clear? Why does my pain need to be presented correctly just to be heard? Why is it that every time I try to be honest, I end up feeling like I'm the one at fault? The answer is this: you're trapped in a maze of psychological manipulation. And the key to escaping isn't convincing the narcissist. It's convincing yourself that you no longer need their validation. You've heard enough, you've said enough, and you've sacrificed too much of your peace trying to make things clear to someone who never truly cared about clarity. They don't seek truth, they seek control. And every time you beg to be heard, you hand them more of that control. So stop trying to make them understand, because you cannot create empathy in someone who never truly wanted to understand. You cannot teach compassion to a soul that's long shut its doors to sincerity. What you need now isn't a better argument. It's self-protection. It's stepping away from that battlefield. It's saying, I don't need your validation for my feelings to be real. Standing up from the negotiation table when you realize the other person never showed up to listen, only to win. And that's when something miraculous begins. When you step out of the game, your silence becomes a declaration. When you stop reacting, you reclaim your power. When you stop waiting for an apology, you stop giving them the power to keep hurting you. Healing doesn't begin when they understand you. Healing begins when you understand yourself. When you understand that you deserve to be loved kindly, not manipulated. When you understand that you don't need anyone else to define who you are, to know how worthy you truly are. And when you understand that your tears are not a signal for someone to care, but a boundary you should never be forced to cross again. And then you rise, not with a bleeding heart, but with a renewed awareness. You don't need anyone's approval to know who you are. Peace is not something others grant you. It's something you have the right to choose. If these words speak truth to your soul, hit subscribe, because the path to healing isn't just about walking away from the narcissist. It's about returning to yourself whole, strong, and no longer needing an apology to move forward. 4, when your kindness is exploited as a weakness, one of the most dangerous illusions in a relationship with a narcissist is the belief that if you hurt deeply enough, they will change. That if you open your heart wide enough, if you show your wounds clearly enough, they will awaken. That your honesty, your vulnerability, your complete emotional breakdown will somehow reach the humanity still left inside them. But then you realize your pain doesn't stir their conscience. It awakens their sense of power. When you cry, when you plead for understanding, when you bare your soul, what you hope for is empathy, but what you often receive is a cold stare, or worse, not because you are unworthy of love, but because in the narcissist's mind, your pain is proof that they're winning. They don't see you as someone in pain. They see you as a reflection of their power. They think, if I can make you hurt this much, how important must I be in your world? That's not love. It's a twisted satisfaction, a word validation that they're still the center of your emotional universe. In a healthy, emotional world, pain is a signal for connection. It's a call for closeness, empathy, and care. But in the world of a narcissist, pain is an opportunity for control. It becomes evidence that they still hold emotional power over you. And if you don't recognize this, you'll keep offering your heart as a sacrificial gift, hoping that one day it will finally change them. But they don't change. Not because you weren't good enough, not because you didn't love deeply enough, but because their emotional wiring does not operate like yours. To them, your pain doesn't trigger compassion. It triggers ego. And the most painful truth of all, Some narcissists actually feel pleasure, yes, glee, when they see you suffer because of them. They see it as a win. They're not cruel in the sense of being heartlessly evil. They're individuals desperately fighting against the feeling of being invisible within themselves. And your pain becomes a mirror reflecting that they matter, that they still exist. That's how they avoid confronting the deep emptiness inside. So every tear you shed doesn't make them pause and reflect. It drives them further to tighten their grip. If you forgive too quickly, if you go back without understanding the nature of the game, you unknowingly reinforce their belief that they have the right to manipulate your reality. They don't need to apologize. They just need to make you doubt yourself long enough until you return, overlook everything, and hand them the power to reset the board. That's when you must ask the deeper question. Am I in a relationship or caught in a psychological game designed to wear me down? A healthy relationship doesn't leave you crying alone at night. It doesn't make you question whether your emotions are valid. It doesn't make you plead for the right to be heard. A real relationship is a space where your pain is met with gentleness, a contempt. And if you find yourself in a relationship where your vulnerability is exploited to keep you stuck, then hear this. Healthy silence is stronger than desperate pleading. The moment you stop sharing, stop crying, stop reacting, it doesn't mean you no longer feel. It means you've started discerning who truly deserves access to your tender places. Not everyone has the right to enter your heart. Not everyone is mature enough to hear someone else's pain without turning it into a weapon. And if you keep offering your emotions like a cry for help, you'll always be a hostage in a game you were never meant to win. Freedom begins when you become disciplined with your emotions. Not cold, not cruel, but intentional, boundaried, principled. You don't need to react to prove you have feelings. You don't need to hurt more to be loved. You don't need to prove your wounds to those who have already decided they don't want to see. And if today you're stepping out of that chaos, say this to yourself: I no longer need anyone to validate this pain to know it's real. I don't need to be seen to know I exist. I don't need to be forgiven to know I deserve peace. Hit subscribe if you're ready for a real healing journey, one that is no longer defined by what others see, but guided by how clearly you have finally begun to see yourself. 5. Why they never take responsibility and why you need to stop waiting. We often grow up believing that if we're sincere enough, desperate enough, and vulnerable enough, the other person will understand, that they'll change, that they'll recognize the hurt they've caused, and somehow they'll come back with an apology, with remorse, with a genuine desire to make things right. But if you've ever loved a narcissist, you know this. One of the most dangerous strategies you ever used was showing your pain too early or too often to the wrong person. You believed your vulnerability would make them stop. But the heartbreaking truth is, it usually made them push further. With more manipulation, more control. To a healthy soul, someone else's pain triggers compassion. But to a narcissist, that same pain triggers their need for dominance. They don't see your tears as an invitation to connect. They see them as a signal that they still hold emotional power over you. They may never say it aloud, but deep down, your desperation, your pleading, your hopeful questions only reinforce their sense of importance. And more terrifyingly, some narcissists feel a twisted sense of satisfaction watching you suffer. Not because they're evil, but because in that moment, they no longer feel empty, invisible, or powerless. They feel relevant. And if you're not awake to this, you'll keep thinking, this time I'll say it better. I'll show them the full depth of my pain. They can't ignore me forever. But once again, you met with silence, with denial, or worse, the reversal. Why are you always overreacting? And then the doubt creeps in. Am I too sensitive? Am I asking for too much? No, you're not asking for too much. You're asking for the bare minimum, kindness. But you're asking it from someone who cannot or will not give it. And what you may not realize is this. Every time you're hurt and they respond not with care, but with control, you begin to lose trust in your own voice. Slowly, you stop believing your own feelings. You stop sharing. You start pushing back. You stop asking questions. You become reasonable, not because you've grown stronger, but because you've grown more afraid. Afraid of being called too sensitive, afraid of being labeled dramatic. You're afraid of disrupting the fragile relationship you've been trying so hard to preserve. But what you don't realize is this. You've been trading away your identity to stay in a game you were never allowed to win. A game where the most powerful piece is your silence, your pain, your exploited loyalty. And so it's time for a shift in awareness. You must understand your pain doesn't need to be acknowledged by someone else to be valid. Their refusal to see it, admit it, or respond to it doesn't make it any less real. It simply reveals their emotional incapacity to face truth. You need to know. Not everyone deserves to witness your pain, because not everyone has the psychological maturity to hold it with care. With the right person, pain becomes a bridge. With the wrong person, it becomes a weapon. And the greatest protection you can offer yourself isn't to build walls to stop loving, but to build gates that decide who gets to come in. This doesn't mean you've grown cold or distant. It means you've grown compassionate with yourself. You no longer have to play the strong one to keep a weak relationship alive. You don't need to react to prove you can love. You only need to remain still and walk away. That is what unravels the narcissist. Not your screams, not your tears, but your absence, your conscious withdrawal. Silence not born of despair, but of awareness. I will no longer drain my soul chasing what I should have been given from the start. Healing begins the moment you stop offering your pain as a plea. When you realize you can hurt, but you don't have to suffer. You can love, but you don't have to lose yourself. You can forgive, but you don't have to forget your worth. If this video touches the deepest part of you, hit subscribe and continue the journey of returning to yourself. Because your pain is not a weakness. It is proof that you still have a heart, and that heart deserves to be guarded. 6, you are no longer a puppet in their play. Your pain once made the narcissist feel powerful, then your silence is what makes them lose control. They are not afraid of your tears. They are not disturbed by your expressions of hurt. In fact, they want you to react, because every reaction, whether it's anger, sorrow, or pleading, confirms one thing: they still have influence over you. To an emotionally healthy person, witnessing someone's suffering brings guilt. It leads to self-reflection. It inspires a desire to make amends. But to a narcissist, your pain doesn't touch their heart. It awakens their possessiveness. They don't see you as someone in need of healing, but as a possession reacting exactly the way they want. They don't need you to be happy. They need you to stay attached. They don't need you to be strong. They need you to be emotionally dependent, and the most effective way to ensure that is to keep you in a state of constant reaction, constantly explaining, justifying, and trying to make them understand. That's when you become controlled without even realizing it. But there's one thing they're never prepared for: when you stop reacting, when you stop texting, stop explaining, stop justifying the emotions you feel inside, not because you no longer feel, but because you've reclaimed ownership of those feelings. You begin to realize you no longer need anyone to validate your pain for it to be real. You don't need to hear "I'm sorry" to know what you endured was unacceptable. You've stopped handing other people the power to define your reality. And to the narcissist, that's a crisis. Not a crisis because they've lost you, or because they are no longer the center of your mind. You turn the mirror around, and instead of seeing them, you start seeing yourself, not through the distorted lens of manipulation, but the clarity, gentleness, and courage. You see how long you've suffered, you see how hard you've tried. And then you begin to ask, do I really have to keep living this way? The answer is no. You don't have to keep playing a role in a script you no longer believe in. You don't have to keep trying to convince someone who never wanted to understand. You don't have to explain why you're leaving to someone who repeatedly ignored why you stayed. What you need to do is walk away with intention, not in rage, but in peace. A peace the narcissist cannot comprehend, because their entire life is a string of frantic reactions to protect a fragile ego. You're walking away from that with a whole heart and a new awareness. You no longer need them to know who you are. And that is the greatest act of rebellion, because a narcissist doesn't truly want to be loved. They want to be needed. They want to be indispensable. But when you learn how to live whole without them, you break the cycle of dependency they worked so hard to maintain. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to cry to be seen. You just need to stand and be silent. And that silence isn't empty. It echoes with a powerful declaration: I'm no longer playing this role. From that moment on, healing begins. You no longer react the way you used to. You respond intentionally. You no longer need to prove you're right, because you've stopped questioning whether you were wrong. And in that clarity, you step out of the shadows, not needing anyone to guide you because you've rediscovered the light within yourself. This isn't an easy journey, but it's a real one. Journey from reactive living to intentional being with boundaries, with principles, and above all, with self-respect. If you're ready for that journey, the journey of breaking free from control and reclaiming your inner power, hit subscribe, because there are countless others like you who need this awakening, and because you are not alone. 7. When they see you hurt, that's when they feel powerful. There's something a narcissist will never say out loud, but they always believe deep down. You'll come back. They assume that no matter how much they hurt you, no matter how deeply you fall into despair, you'll eventually return. Not because you're weak, but because they've grown too accustomed to your forgiveness. To a narcissist, your ability to endure the pain they cause doesn't earn their admiration. That doesn't make them value your love. It only reinforces a twisted belief in their mind. You belong to them, and that's what keeps the cycle going. They hurt you, you suffer, you react, and then you come back. And each time, you're not just forgiving their actions, you're unconsciously confirming the role they've written for you. The forgiver, the soft one, the one who never leaves. In their eyes, you're not a free individual with your own feelings and boundaries. You're a function, a feature in the narrative they tell themselves. And that function is to stay. It doesn't matter how much you've cried, how much dignity you've lost. In their mind, you'll return because you still love them. But now is the moment for a deeper awakening. Love is not proof that you should accept harm. Love is not a reason to keep sacrificing your self-worth. And loving someone should never become a self-imposed sentence. A narcissist doesn't see your love as a gift. They see it as a given, a resource to be exploited. And when you start to pull away, when you begin to doubt, they don't feel remorse. They push back. They'll suddenly become sweet. They'll try to revive old memories. They'll make you believe maybe this time will be different, but it never is because they haven't changed. They've only adjusted their tactics. You must understand this. Their return is not a sign of regret. It's a calculated move to regain control. When you come back, they don't feel relieved to be loved. They feel relieved that the game can resume. And next time they'll play harder because now they know exactly where your weakness lies. That's why choosing to leave and not come back is the most radical act of defiance you can make against a narcissist. It destroys the entire power structure they've built. It shatters the script they believed you'd follow forever. And it deeply unsettles them, not because they lost you, but because they lost their starring role in your life. You rewrote the story. You placed a period on a long chapter of pain and began a new one, a story where you belong to yourself. From the moment you stop returning, you are telling yourself, I deserve something better. I no longer want to live in a cycle of false hope. I choose truth even if it hurts. I choose freedom even if it feels lonely at first. And the truth is, the hardest part isn't leaving them. It's letting go of the hope that one day they'll become the person you always believed they could be. That is the death of a dream, but also the rebirth of your self-respect. You'll feel empty for a while, but then you'll feel lighter. You'll stop waiting for messages. Stop wondering, will they treat me kindly or cruelly today? You'll sleep better. Oh, you'll breathe deeper. And most importantly, you'll finally hear yourself again. After so long of listening to someone who never truly heard you. If you're standing at that crossroads, if you've just stepped out of that dark doorway, get subscribed. Because what you've done is not giving up. It's your first victory. Quiet, but powerful one. A declaration to the world and to your own soul that from now on, you will no longer belong to someone who only knows how to hurt you. You chose yourself. And that is the one thing a narcissist never saw coming. 8. You don't need validation to know you have worth. There's a painful truth we must face. A narcissist doesn't just hurt you. They make you believe that hurt is normal. They don't just control you with actions. They redefine your understanding of love, worth, and boundaries. And the most dangerous part isn't that they wound you. It's that they slowly convince you to accept that pain as an inevitable part of the relationship. In the beginning, you knew something was wrong. You felt the injustice, the manipulation, the unsettling coldness in their words and behavior. But over time, you began to soften your boundaries. You began to make excuses for them. You called their silence needing space. You called their insults just stress. You told yourself that always walking on eggshells was just part of loving someone. Bit by bit, you drifted away from yourself. You stopped being the person who clearly knew right from wrong. You became someone who lived according to their emotional state. someone who was told they were too much every time they needed to be heard and too dramatic every time they dared to ask a question. A narcissist doesn't need chains to keep you. They use your self-doubt, and that binds stronger than any rope. They teach you that your reactions are the problem, that you're too sensitive, that you need to grow up. Toughen up. Stop dreaming so much, and you believe them. Not because you're foolish, but because you love, and love made you compromise. Until one day, you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person looking back. You see tired eyes, a depleted spirit, a heart that still beats but no longer sings. And in that moment, you understand. It's not that you weren't good enough. It's that you used all your goodness trying to nurture someone who never intended to return kindness. That's when the seed of awakening begins to sprout. You begin to ask, is this really love? Or just a distorted version of dependence? You stop thinking, I'm too weak, and start realizing, I've been too silent. You no longer want to play the role someone else wrote for you, the role of the endurer. You weren't born to endure. Go live fastly and freely. And the most important realization comes. Peace will never be found in a place where you must trade your identity to keep a relationship. From that moment, you begin to rewrite your story. You reset your boundary. You learn how to say no. No to manipulation. No to blame. No to faking strength just to survive. You learn to be silent, not out of submission, but because you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to someone who never truly listened. That is the first step to freedom. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet moment alone when you no longer want to go back to a place you once called home. It's the decision to stop texting, to stop hoping, to stop thinking that if you just tried a little harder, they would finally change. Because now you know they won't. Not because you're unworthy, but because change requires responsibility. And responsibility is what narcissists fear most. They survive on denial, on rewriting reality, on making you feel guilty for asking for basic respect. You can't wake someone who's pretending to sleep. You can't fix someone who doesn't believe they're broken. But you can choose to stop spending your life trying to save a soul that doesn't want to be saved. And you can walk away, not as a victim, but as a warrior, one who has survived the most invisible yet brutal battle, the battle to reclaim yourself. If you're in that path, or just stepping out of that painful door, hit subscribe to continue this healing journey with us. A journey that doesn't need anyone's approval. A journey where you and only you write the ending. Not in delusion, but in awakening. And if someone ever asks, what did you do to escape them? You can answer with silence, with serenity, and with a radiant smile. I chose myself. 9. Love should never require you to abandon yourself. If you've ever found yourself trapped in a story you didn't write, then today's the day you reclaim the pen. Narcissists have a unique ability. They rewrite history, not world history, but the history between the two of you. In their version, they're always the misunderstood one, the victim who gave everything and was never appreciated. Like you're too emotional, too reactive, the one who pressured them, who was never satisfied. And the danger is, if you're not grounded in self-awareness, you might start to believe they're right. You might start asking yourself, did I actually do something wrong? Was I too harsh? Did I make them this way? But pause, take a deep breath. And remember, when it all began, you weren't like this. You were someone who loved wholeheartedly. You had hope. You were patient. You believed that anyone could change if they were loved enough. But slowly you were pushed into a role that wasn't yours. A role where you had to apologize for feeling, justify your hurt, and stay silent just to preserve the relationship. They didn't just manipulate your emotions, they manipulated your memories. And here's what needs to be said. When a narcissist rewrites the story, it's not just lying. It's a survival tactic. They can't accept being the one who causes harm, because that threatens the perfect image they're desperately trying to maintain. So instead of owning their wrongdoings, they restructure the truth, not just to deceive others, but to deceive themselves. In their version of events, your pain becomes overreacting. Your efforts become controlling. And every time you pull away, you're labeled as abandoning them. They wrap you in the costume of the villain so they can keep wearing the costume of the victim and keep receiving sympathy from the outside world. And if you don't wake up, you're inside a funhouse mirror they built where you no longer know what's real and no longer know who you truly are. You'll feel guilty without knowing what you did wrong. You'll feel like you need to prove something but you're not even sure what. You'll find yourself trapped in invisible arguments. It was real goal is mutual understanding, but to make you doubt yourself. But there is a way out, and it begins with one simple act: stop reading from their script. You don't need to convince them you're right. You don't need to reclaim the good person role in the story they're telling others. You only need to rewrite the truth in your own mind, your own heart, and your own life. You need to remind yourself, no, I'm not too sensitive. I just have real emotions. No, I didn't abandon them. I was emotionally abandoned too many times in an unfair relationship. No, I'm not controlling. I'm protecting my boundaries. And when you begin to tell the story in your own voice, something powerful happens. You start to see clearly what pain was theirs to own and what strength was always yours but had been buried. You realize they may rewrite the past, but they can't rewrite your present or your future unless you hand them the pen. And today you get to say, I'm taking that pen back. You don't need rage. You don't need verbiage. You only need calm conviction. I no longer live in anyone else's story. I live in the truth I saw, endured, and survived. That's how you step out of the supporting role. That's when you become the author. If you've ever felt lost in a story that didn't feel like your own, hit subscribe, because from now on, you're not just healing, you're rewriting your life. It's a life no longer shaped by distorted accusations, but built on courage, clarity, and self-love. This story is yours, and only you have the right to decide what happens next. You've come a long way, and even if you don't fully realize it yet, the fact that you're still here, still listening, still searching for truth amid all the pain is proof that you never gave up. You're no longer the person who once knelt begging for an explanation. You're no longer the one who sent hundreds of messages hoping for an ounce of emotional response. You're no longer the one who believed, if I just love enough, they'll change. No, now you are someone who knows that real love never asks you to abandon yourself in order to survive. You are the one who dared to step out of the illusion, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself more. Maybe you don't feel fully free yet. Maybe you still tremble when the memories return, but that doesn't make you weak. That makes you real, and real is always stronger than fake. The freedom you're searching for isn't found in their apology. It's not found in whether or not they finally get it. Your freedom lies in the fact that you no longer need those things to know you deserve something better. You don't need someone to validate your pain in order to move forward. You don't need them to look back so you can heal. You only need the one who made it through it all and still carries a heart that hasn't turned bitter, a heart that still knows how to love. But this time, it chooses to love the right person, yourself. And if today is the day you choose not to go back, if today is the day you close that door, not out of anger, but because you love yourself too much to endure it one more time, then congratulations. Today is the first day you are living as a free person. If this video spoke to you, if you saw yourself in every word, hit subscribe. We don't just tell the stories of victims. We tell the stories of survivors, those who rise stronger from the ruins, because the moment you stopped asking for permission to heal, you began healing on your own.